The winter of 1879 holds a story of extraordinary perception buried beneath its unforgiving snows. In the remote wilderness of the Montana Territory, where survival demanded every human faculty be razor-sharp, one woman's journey would challenge everything we understand about the senses. This is the remarkable tale of Rebecca Thornton, who lost her sight to scarlet fever but discovered a profound inner vision that even the most eagle-eyed hunters couldn't perceive, and Nighthawk, a Cherokee medicine man, whose understanding of the unseen world would transform both their destinies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Abandoned and facing certain death in a merciless mountain blizzard, Rebecca's story became a testament to the untapped abilities that lie dormant within us all, and the profound connections formed when conventional wisdom is swept away by the winds of necessity. Before we continue with this extraordinary journey, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your spirit, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's tale will reveal another forgotten chapter of history that will leave you speechless. January 1879 cloaked the Montana Territory in a pristine blanket of white that concealed deadly secrets beneath its beauty. The Henderson wagon train struggled northward along the Bitterroot Valley, 23 families fleeing. The economic collapse in the east, seeking prosperity in the promised territories of the northwest. Their worldly possessions and dwindling hopes packed tightly beneath canvas covers, now heavy with 3 days of continuous snowfall. Rebecca Thornton sat wrapped in blankets near the center of the second-to-last wagon, her slender fingers working methodically at knitting a scarf despite the eyes that stared sightlessly ahead. Though they appeared a striking pale blue, they registered nothing of the visual world around her, the legacy of the scarlet fever that had claimed her sight 8 years ago when she was just 19. At 27, she had crafted a world, through touch, sound, and something else, something she hesitated to name even in her private thoughts, a sense of knowing that transcended conventional perception. "We need to make camp soon," Maxwell Henderson shouted from the lead wagon, his voice barely carrying over the mounting wind. "There's a protected valley ahead that should offer some shelter from this weather." Rebecca's fingers paused in their work, her head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond the obvious sounds of creaking wagons and nervous livestock. "The storm is getting worse," she murmured, more to herself than to her companions. Her aunt and uncle, the Prestons, who had reluctantly become her caretakers after her parents' deaths, paid no attention. They had long since learned to ignore her occasional pronouncements, dismissing them as the ramblings of a handicapped dependent. Esther Preston pulled her fur-lined cloak tighter as a particularly strong gust rocked the wagon. "This weather will be the death of us all," she muttered. "We should have waited until spring like sensible folk." Rebecca felt the familiar sting of her aunt's implied accusation. The Prestons had only agreed to this winter journey because of the opportunity to claim prime homesteading land in Montana Territory, land that would legally include Rebecca as their dependent, increasing their allotment substantially. Her presence, though resented, had practical value, or at least it had until now. "We've lost sight of the Wilkinsons' wagon," Thomas Preston announced as he returned from checking on their oxen. "Henderson says we press on to the valley. No time to search in this weather." Rebecca's spine straightened. "The Wilkinsons' youngest has the cough. They've likely fallen behind to tend to him." She reached for her woolen coat. "We should wait," her uncle snorted, "and risk the entire train for one sickly child. Henderson knows what he's doing. Survival means tough choices." The callousness in his voice no longer surprised Rebecca. 3 months on the trail had stripped away the veneer of civilization. from many of their party, revealing the hardness beneath. The wagon jolted violently as they descended a steep embankment, nearly sending Rebecca tumbling to the floor. She grabbed the side rail, fingertips tingling oddly as they had increasingly done in recent weeks. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "This isn't the valley Henderson described." "And how would you know that?" Aunt Esther snapped. "Save your nonsense. Thomas, check with Henderson. This descent seems wrong." Rebecca fell silent as her uncle departed once more into the swirling snow. The tingling in her fingers intensified, accompanied by a pressure behind her sightless eyes. These sensations had begun shortly after they crossed the continental divide, growing stronger with each passing day. Initially, she'd dismissed them as symptoms of the extreme cold, but now she wasn't so certain. They carried meaning, implications she couldn't yet decipher but couldn't ignore. Thomas Preston returned 20 minutes later, snow crusting his beard and eyebrows. "Henderson admits we've drifted off course," he reported grimly. "The valley is somewhere east, but visibility is nearly zero. We're stopping here to wait out the worst of it." "Here," Esther's voice rose with alarm. "We're exposed on this slope. There's no shelter." "It's this, or continue blindly," Thomas replied, the irony of his phrasing lost on him as Rebecca flinched slightly. "Henderson's calling a meeting, all heads of households." Rebecca listened to her uncle's retreating footsteps, counting his strides until they faded beneath the storm's persistent howl. 16 steps from wagon to meeting, the wind from the northwest increasing in intensity, the temperature dropping precipitously. All these details registered clearly despite her blindness, ordinary observations perhaps, but compiled with unusual precision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What do you think they're discussing?" she asked her aunt, already suspecting the answer. Esther's silence lasted several heartbeats too long. "Survival strategies," she finally replied, the evasiveness evident in her tone. When Thomas Preston returned an hour later, his footsteps were hesitant, lacking their usual confident stride. "Decisions have been made," he announced, his voice carrying a forced neutrality that immediately set Rebecca on alert. "The supplies are dangerously low. Every wagon must lighten its load to continue tomorrow." "What exactly does that mean?" "Thomas?" Esther asked, though Rebecca sensed her aunt already knew. "Non-essential items remain behind," he replied. "And—" he paused, clearing his throat. "Some travelers will need to wait here with a portion of supplies while the main party seeks help." Rebecca's hands stilled in her lap. "And who determines which travelers are non-essential?" she asked quietly. The silence that followed confirmed her worst fears. In a cruel calculus of wilderness survival, a blind woman would never be deemed essential. She had known this day might come since they left Minnesota, had felt it approaching with the same certainty. She now felt the storm intensifying around them. "There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about half a mile back," Thomas finally said. "Henderson's men found it while scouting. It's small but has walls and a roof. You'll be safer there than continuing with us through the mountain pass." Rebecca sat perfectly still, absorbing the betrayal. Not unexpected, yet painful nonetheless. "You're leaving me behind," she stated flatly, "to die alone in a wilderness cabin while you pursue your homesteading dreams." "Don't be dramatic," Esther interjected. "Once we reach the settlement, we'll send help. It's temporary." "How long?" Rebecca asked. "How many days of supplies will you leave me?" Another telling pause. 4 days' worth, Thomas finally admitted. "It's all we can spare. 4 days, in winter, in Montana Territory." They all knew what this meant. Any rescue would take a minimum of a week, assuming the wagon train even reached civilization. The Mathematics of her survival didn't add up, and the Prestons were intelligent enough to understand this. "I see," Rebecca said, the irony of the phrase not lost on her this time, for indeed without physical sight she saw clearly the truth of her situation. The Prestons had tolerated her presence because of the additional land grant she represented. Now faced with dwindling supplies and an uncertain future, she had become an expendable burden. "It's not just you," Thomas added, as if this might soften the blow. "The Wilkinson's boy is too sick to travel. His mother's staying with him at the cabin too." "A dying child and a blind woman," Rebecca observed coldly. "How convenient that the two least useful members of the party can be abandoned together." "That's enough," Esther snapped. "This isn't abandonment, it's practical necessity. We'll send help when we can." Rebecca's fingers tingled violently now, almost painfully. The sensation spread up her arms, bringing with it a wave of knowing that she couldn't explain. "No," she said quietly. "You won't. You've been planning this since Denver. I've heard the whispers." Her uncle's sharp intake of breath confirmed what she'd long suspected. The hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, the inventorying of supplies, the calculated redistribution of resources, all had been building to this moment. "You have 2 hours to gather your things," Thomas said finally, ignoring her accusation. "Henderson wants to deliver you to the cabin before nightfall." As Rebecca packed her meager belongings, extra socks, her father's pocket watch, a small knife he'd given her for her 16th birthday, and the half-finished scarf she'd been knitting, she listened to her aunt and uncle murmuring in the corner of the wagon. They thought themselves discreet, but years without sight had honed her hearing to remarkable acuity. "Letter from the land office said she must be present at the registration," Thomas whispered. "Otherwise her portion reverts to the general claim pool." "She doesn't need to know that," Esther replied. "Once we're established, we can always say she died en route. No one will question it after a winter journey." Rebecca's hands stilled. So, that was it. Not just the burden of caring for a blind dependent, but the legal requirement of her presence at the land registry. They needed her alive until then, but afterward she became an impediment to their full ownership. The cabin wasn't a temporary shelter. It was intended as her tomb. 2 hours later, Rebecca found herself seated on a hard-packed snowbank, a small bundle of supplies at her feet, listening to the wagon train continue its journey without her. The abandoned trapper's cabin stood behind her, its rough-hewn logs offering minimal protection against the elements. Beside her, Martha Wilkinson sobbed quietly, cradling her feverish 6-year-old son. "God help us," Martha whispered, her voice broken with despair. Rebecca turned toward the sound, reaching until her hand found the woman's shoulder. "We need to get inside," she said firmly, "before the temperature drops further." The cabin, when they entered, proved even more rudimentary than Rebecca had feared. Her exploring hands discovered a dirt floor, walls with gaps large enough to allow snow to sift through, and a partially collapsed roof. The promised firewood was nothing more than a small bundle of damp sticks, barely enough for a night's warmth, let alone 4 days. As Martha settled her son on a pile of old furs in the corner, apparently abandoned by the cabin's previous occupant, Rebecca methodically explored every inch of their shelter. Years of blindness had taught her to create detailed mental maps of new environments. This one offered little comfort: a broken table, a 3-legged stool, an empty storage chest, and a fireplace with a partially blocked chimney comprised the cabin's amenities. "They've left us to die," Martha said flatly, voicing what Rebecca had already concluded. "My Jacob won't last 2 days in this cold, and we'll follow soon after." Rebecca leaned against the rough wall, the tingling in her fingers now a constant presence. "Perhaps," she acknowledged, unwilling to offer false hope. Then, to her own surprise, she added, But I don't believe our story ends here. What choice do we have? Martha asked bitterly. No one knows we're here except those who abandoned us. Rebecca tilted her head, focusing on a sensation that had been growing steadily since they entered the cabin. That's not entirely true, she said slowly. Someone has been here. Recently. Martha's disbelief was palpable. How could you possibly know that? Rebecca hesitated, uncertain how to explain what she herself didn't fully understand. I sense it, she finally said. The air carries traces of herbs I don't recognize. There's a pattern to how things are arranged, deliberate, not abandoned in haste. Blind fancies, Martha dismissed, though fear had crept into her voice. This cabin has been empty for months, maybe years. Rebecca moved to the fireplace, her fingers finding the stones of the hearth. These ashes are recent, she insisted, no more than a few days old. And there's something else. Her hands explored further, discovering a small bundle tucked into a crevice between stones. Martha, there's a package here. The bundle contained dried herbs wrapped in a piece of soft leather tied with sinew. Rebecca brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply. Cedar, sage, and others I don't recognize. Indian medicines, Martha said, her voice tight with new fear. God preserve us. We're in a savage's hunting cabin. Rebecca frowned at the woman's terminology, but understood her fear. Relations between settlers and native tribes remained strained throughout the territories. For many travelers like the Prestons, indigenous peoples represented nothing but threat and danger, a perspective Rebecca had never fully shared. Whoever left these medicines might return, she pointed out pragmatically. That could be our salvation, not our doom. Martha clutched her son tighter. Indians would likely kill us on sight. Perhaps, Rebecca acknowledged. Or perhaps they possess more humanity than those who abandoned us here. As night fell, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, Rebecca managed to start a small fire with the damp wood. The blaze provided minimal heat, but illuminated the cabin enough for Martha to see what Rebecca had sensed. The space, though simple, showed signs of recent habitation and care. Little Jacob's condition worsened as midnight approached. His breathing became labored, each inhale a ragged struggle that tore at Rebecca's heart. Without medical intervention, the child would likely not survive until morning. Rebecca sat beside the boy, her fingers lightly touching his forehead. The fever burned dangerously high beneath her touch. Acting on instinct, she reached for the bundle of herbs, selecting several that seemed to call to her sensitive fingertips. "What are you doing?" Martha asked warily as Rebecca crushed the herbs between her palms. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted, "but doing nothing ensures he won't survive the night." She mixed the crushed herbs with snow in their only pot, holding it near the fire until the mixture warmed. The aroma that rose from it was pungent, but not unpleasant, earthy and sharp with unfamiliar notes that seemed to clear her senses further. "Help me give this to him," she instructed Martha, who hesitated only briefly before lifting her son's head. Rebecca carefully administered the herbal tea, drop by drop. Whether it was the liquid itself or simply the hydration, Jacob's breathing eased slightly within the hour. By dawn, his fever had dropped marginally, still dangerous, but no longer immediately life-threatening. The storm continued unabated outside, howling around the cabin's fragile structure with predatory intensity. Rebecca conserved their meager firewood, allowing the flames to die down to embers as she carefully monitored the temperature inside their shelter. Every degree would matter in the coming days. "How did you know which herbs to use?" Martha asked. As morning light filtered through the cabin's cracks, Rebecca shook her head. "I didn't," she confessed. "It was more a feeling. They seemed right somehow." Martha was silent for a long moment. "My grandmother had a gift for healing," she finally said. She claimed she could feel ailments with her hands, know which plants would help. The church called it superstition, but... She trailed off, watching her son's more peaceful sleep. Rebecca nodded, understanding the conflict between conventional wisdom and undeniable results. Since losing her sight, she had developed sensitivities others dismissed. The ability to detect approaching weather changes, to sense moods and intentions through subtle shifts in breath and posture, to navigate spaces through variations in air currents. But this new awareness, this knowing of plants and their properties, was unprecedented. By midday, their situation had grown more precarious. The fire had been reduced to the barest embers to conserve wood. The temperature inside the cabin hovered just above freezing. Their food supplies, already minimal, would need careful rationing to last even the promised 4 days. Then, above the storm's persistent howl, Rebecca heard it, a sound distinct from the wind and creaking timber. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, approaching the cabin. "Someone's coming," she whispered, rising to her feet. Martha grabbed her son and retreated to the farthest corner. "Henderson's men returning." Rebecca shook her head, certain without knowing why. "No, someone else." She moved toward the door, guided by the sound of approaching footsteps crunching through deep snow. Before she could reach it, the cabin door swung open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and frigid air. Rebecca stood perfectly still, facing the entrance, aware of a presence far different from any settler she had encountered on their journey west. "You have used my medicines," a deep voice observed in accented but clear English. Not accusatory, merely stating fact. Rebecca inclined her head slightly. "For the child. He burns with fever." A moment of silence followed, filled with assessment. Then the stranger entered fully, closing the door behind him. Rebecca sensed his movements. Deliberate, efficient, conserving energy in the way of someone intimately familiar with wilderness survival. "I am called Nighthawk," he introduced himself. "This shelter is my winter hunting camp." "Rebecca Thornton," she replied, then gestured toward the corner. "And Martha Wilkinson with her son Jacob." Martha made a small sound of distress, but remained silent, likely frozen between fear of their visitor and recognition of their desperate circumstances. Rebecca felt Nighthawk's attention shift to her, his gaze lingering on her sightless eyes. The tingling in her fingers intensified to an almost painful degree. "You see without eyes," he stated, again a simple observation rather than a question. The accuracy of his assessment startled her. "I sense things sometimes," she admitted cautiously. "More so in recent weeks." Nighthawk moved further into the cabin, his footfalls nearly silent now that he was out of the deep snow. Rebecca tracked his movement by the subtle shifts in air currents and the earthy scent of leather, smoke, and unfamiliar herbs that accompanied him. He knelt beside Jacob, and Martha's fearful intake of breath suggested she expected harm. Instead, Nighthawk examined the boy with gentle efficiency, then spoke quietly. "The medicines you chose were correct, unexpected for one not trained in our ways." "I didn't choose them," Rebecca explained. "They seemed to choose me." This answer appeared to satisfy Nighthawk. He rose and moved to the fireplace, adding fuel from a supply he must have brought with him. The flames leapt back to life, bringing blessed warmth to the cabin. "Your people abandoned you," he stated, again not a question. "They determined we were unnecessary burdens," Rebecca confirmed, seeing no benefit in hiding the truth. Nighthawk was silent for several moments, tending the fire. When he spoke again, his voice carried a depth of understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. "My people have a name for those who see beyond sight. We call them those who walk between worlds. Such gifts are honored, not discarded. The tingling in Rebecca's fingers spread up her arms to her shoulders, a physical manifestation of recognition she couldn't explain. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she confessed. "The land speaks differently to different ears," Nighthawk replied. "Some hear nothing, some hear whispers, a rare few hear clearly." Martha, who had been listening warily, finally spoke up. "Are you saying she has some kind of power?" Nighthawk considered this. "Not power, as your people understand it. Awareness, perhaps, connection." He turned back to Rebecca. "How long have your physical eyes been dark?" 8 years, she answered. "Scarlet fever took my sight when I was 19. He nodded as if this confirmed something. "Often when one sense is lost, others strengthen. But your gift goes beyond compensation. The plants responded to you. This is rare, even among my people." Rebecca struggled to reconcile his words with her understanding of the world. Raised in a traditional Christian household in Minnesota, she had been taught that such concepts bordered on paganism, yet her own experiences increasingly contradicted that narrow viewpoint. "What happens now?" she asked pragmatically, addressing their immediate situation. "Now you make a choice," Nighthawk replied simply. "This storm strengthens. It will last many days. The child requires proper shelter and medicine. The settlement your people seek is unreachable in this weather." "And the alternative?" Rebecca prompted, sensing there was one. "My winter camp lies 3 valleys east. Strong walls, adequate provisions, medicinal knowledge." He paused. "I did not expect to find others here, but my people do not abandon those in need, regardless of their origins." Martha gasped softly. "You're offering to take us to your camp, to your people." "It is a journey of some difficulty," Nighthawk cautioned, "but the boy will not survive here." Rebecca considered their options, which in truth were no options at all. Remain, and certainly perish, or trust this stranger who recognized something in her that she barely understood herself. "We accept your help," she decided firmly, speaking for both of them despite Martha's unvoiced reservations. "Thank you." Nighthawk moved with practiced efficiency, gathering their few supplies and adding them to his own. "The journey requires strength," he warned. "We must travel before nightfall while visibility permits." Within the hour, they were prepared to depart. Nighthawk had fashioned a travois from branches and leather to transport Jacob, who remained too weak to walk. Martha's fear had gradually subsided in the face of the medicine man's evident concern for her son's well-being. As they stepped outside into the unforgiving landscape, Rebecca felt something shift within her, the tingling that had plagued her. Fingers now spread throughout her body, transforming into a strange awareness of their surroundings. Though her eyes registered nothing but darkness, she perceived the terrain ahead with unusual clarity. Not visual imagery, but a complex understanding of space, contour, and direction that defied explanation. "The trail narrows ahead," she said without thinking. "There's a sharp drop to the right." Nighthawk paused, turning toward her. "Yes," he confirmed, surprise evident in his voice. "How did you know this?" Rebecca shook her head, unable to articulate the knowing that flowed through her. "I just feel it." As they progressed through the storm-swept wilderness, Rebecca's awareness continued to expand. She moved with increasing confidence, sometimes identifying obstacles before Nighthawk himself mentioned them. The medicine man observed this phenomenon with evident interest, but asked no further questions, simply adjusting their path when she spoke. Martha watched with growing astonishment as the blind woman navigated the treacherous landscape with uncanny precision. "It's not natural," she whispered, when Nighthawk moved ahead to scout a particularly difficult passage. "Neither is abandoning a child and a blind woman to die Rebecca pointed out quietly, yet our civilized companions found that perfectly acceptable. The journey challenged them all. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere feet. Temperature continued to drop as daylight waned. Jacob, despite the travois, suffered from exposure, his condition deteriorating despite Nighthawk's best efforts to shield him. By late afternoon, even Rebecca's inexplicable awareness couldn't counter the physical toll of trudging through knee-deep snow against biting wind. Her strength began to fail, each step requiring greater effort than the last. Nighthawk noticed. Immediately, without comment, he adjusted their course slightly. "There is shelter ahead," he announced. "Not my camp, but a sacred place where we can rest safely for the night." When they reached the location 30 minutes later, Rebecca understood immediately why he called it sacred. Even through her blindness, she sensed something profound about the space. A limestone cave entrance, partially concealed by a natural rock formation that blocked the worst of the wind and snow. The Cave of Voices, Nighthawk named it as. He helped them inside. A place of power for my people, for many generations. Inside, the howl of the blizzard diminished to a distant murmur. The temperature, while still cold, rose to tolerable levels as they moved deeper into the natural shelter. To Rebecca's heightened senses, the cave felt alive somehow, not in a frightening way, but as if the very stone remembered those who had sought refuge here before. Nighthawk worked quickly, establishing a small fire in what was evidently a long-used fire pit. He arranged Jacob on a bed of evergreen boughs, then prepared a more complex herbal treatment than what Rebecca had. Attempted at the cabin. "This place has been used for healing ceremonies for generations," he explained as he worked. "The spirits here are benevolent to those who come with respect." Martha, exhausted and worried for her son, simply nodded, beyond questioning such statements. Rebecca, however, felt the truth of his words resonating through her being. The tingling sensation, her constant companion for weeks now, intensified to an almost overwhelming degree within the cave. "I feel them," she whispered, not entirely meaning to speak aloud. "The presence here." Nighthawk looked up from his work, studying her with newfound intensity. "Very few outsiders sense the spirits of this place," he said quietly. "Your gift is stronger than I first believed." As they rested and warmed themselves, Nighthawk shared his story in measured tones. He was Cherokee, originally from lands far to the southeast. His people had been forced westward decades earlier on what they called the Trail Where They Cried, the brutal forced migration that had claimed thousands of Cherokee lives. "My father was a healer who survived the journey west," he explained. "He taught me the old knowledge, the connection between plants, animals, earth, and human suffering." "Why are you so far north?" Martha asked, her initial fear now replaced by cautious curiosity. "I thought the Cherokee was settled in Indian territory." "Most remain there," Nighthawk acknowledged. "Some, like myself, were called to other places. The healing knowledge was needed beyond our new boundaries." He explained that he traveled between various tribes across the northern territories, sharing medicinal knowledge with those who welcomed it. His winter camp served as both shelter during the harshest months and a place to prepare medicines from plants harvested throughout the year. "And you just help people?" Martha asked, the concept clearly challenging her preconceptions, "even those not of your tribe?" Nighthawk nodded. "Healing doesn't recognize such divisions. Pain is pain, regardless of the language spoken or the color of skin." Rebecca listened intently, drawn not just to his words, but to the philosophy they represented. Throughout her life, she had encountered constant limitations, first as a woman in a society that valued male achievement, then as a blind person in a world designed for the sighted. Nighthawk's perspective offered something radical, the idea that difference could be strength, not weakness. As night deepened around them, Jacob's condition stabilized under Nighthawk's care. The boy's breathing eased, his fever reduced by careful application of herbal compresses and teas. Martha finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep beside her son with her hand clasping his small fingers. Rebecca remained awake, the cave's strange energy making rest elusive. She sat near the fire, opposite Nighthawk, aware of his thoughtful gaze. "You have questions," he observed. Rebecca nodded. "Many, but one presses more urgently than others." She hesitated, then continued. "What is happening to me? These sensations, this awareness, it's been growing stronger since we entered the mountains. Today, I could navigate terrain I couldn't see. It makes no sense." Nighthawk was silent for several moments, considering his response. "Among my people," he finally said, "there are those born with one kind of sight who later receive another, often through loss or great suffering. You believe my blindness opened the way for something else?" Rebecca suggested. "Not the blindness itself," he clarified, "but your response to it. Many who lose sight become bitter, lose connection. You turned inward, developed other ways of knowing." Rebecca contemplated this. It was true that after the initial despair of losing her sight, she had methodically developed alternative ways of experiencing the world. What others viewed as accommodation, she had come to see as adaptation, not lesser, just different. "But this is more than adaptation," she pointed out. "What happened today goes beyond refined hearing or touch." "Yes," Nighthawk agreed simply. "What awakens in you is what my grandmother called the old knowing, a way of perceiving that existed before people relied so heavily on eyes alone." "And the plants? How I knew which herbs to use for Jacob." Nighthawk leaned forward slightly. "Each plant carries its purpose, its medicine. Most people must learn these through teaching and experience. A rare few can sense directly what the plant offers." The concept should have seemed absurd to Rebecca, raised as she was in the rational traditions of 19th century America. Yet her own experiences made denial impossible. Something profound was awakening within her, something that transcended conventional understanding. "If what you say is true," she said slowly, "then why now? Why here?" "Power concentrates in certain places," Nighthawk explained. "These mountains hold old energies, and sometimes—" He paused, searching for words. "Sometimes gifts awaken when they are most needed." Rebecca considered the implications of his statement. "You believe there's purpose to this, that it's happening for a reason?" "I believe you stand at a threshold," Nighthawk replied. "What lies beyond it depends on choices yet unmade." His words resonated with something deep within Rebecca, a recognition that despite being abandoned, despite the Prestons' betrayal and the harsh realities of their situation, she had arrived exactly where she needed to be, not by design or intention, but through a confluence of circumstances that now seemed less random than before. "What happens when we reach your camp?" she asked, moving to practical matters. "The boy will receive proper care. The woman will find safety until Spring Thaw allows travel to settlements." He paused, studying her with those perceptive eyes she could sense but not see. "For you, a different path may open." "What kind of path?" "One of learning," Nighthawk said simply, "if you choose it." As dawn broke over the cave of voices, Rebecca awoke to find her perception had shifted yet again. The tingling sensation now flowed continuously through her body, no longer painful, but present, a constant current of awareness that connected her to their surroundings with startling clarity. Though her physical eyes remained sightless, she sensed the cave's contours, felt the lingering warmth of Nighthawk's carefully banked fire, and perceived Martha and Jacob's sleeping forms without needing to touch or hear them. "Your gift strengthens," Nighthawk observed quietly from the cave entrance, where he stood watching the sunrise. "The spirits of this place have recognized you." Rebecca rose carefully, orienting herself in the space with newfound confidence. "I feel different," she admitted, joining him near the entrance where cold morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh snow. "As if I've been asleep my entire life and am only now truly awakening." "Such is often the way," Nighthawk replied. "What others call blindness has become your doorway." Martha stirred behind them, immediately checking her son. "His fever has broken," she announced with mingled surprise and relief. "Jacob? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" The boy's weak voice answering. His mother brought smiles to all their faces. This small victory, a child stepping back from death's precipice, cemented a fragile trust between the unlikely companions thrown together by circumstance and cruelty. Nighthawk moved efficiently, preparing a simple but nourishing breakfast from his supplies. As they ate, he outlined the journey ahead. "The storm has passed, but deep snow remains. My winter camp lies another day's travel east, through what your people call Thunder Pass." "Is Jacob strong enough for such a journey?" Martha asked, protective arm around her son. "The alternative is returning to the trapper's cabin," Nighthawk pointed out gently, "with limited supplies and no medicine." The decision was obvious. After breaking their fast, they departed the Cave of Voices, Rebecca feeling a curious reluctance to leave the sacred space that had somehow catalyzed her emerging abilities. The morning sun transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle that only Martha could see in the conventional sense, yet Rebecca perceived in her own unique way. Jacob, though weak, could now sit upright on the travois Nighthawk had constructed. The boy watched Rebecca with undisguised fascination as she navigated the challenging terrain without assistance, sometimes identifying obstacles before the others noticed them. "How do you do that?" he finally asked, after she warned of a hidden depression beneath the snow seconds before Nighthawk's foot would have found it. Rebecca smiled, unsure how to explain something she barely understood herself. "I feel the land speaking," she said simply, using Nighthawk's terminology, which somehow felt right. "Different places have different voices." "Can you teach me?" the boy asked eagerly. Martha made a small, distressed sound, but Rebecca merely considered the question thoughtfully. "Perhaps," she replied, "but first I must learn to understand it myself." Their progress through the wilderness following the storm proved challenging but steady. Nighthawk set a careful pace, balancing the need for speed against their varying levels of endurance. His knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as he selected routes that minimized exposure to deep snow and treacherous slopes. By midday, they had entered a narrow defile that Nighthawk identified as the approach to Thunder Pass. Towering rock formations rose on either side, creating a natural corridor through the otherwise impassable mountains. The sun barely penetrated here, casting the passage in dim blue light and shadow. "We are entering Cherokee hunting grounds," Nighthawk informed them. "Few white settlers have seen these trails." Rebecca sensed his meaning. They were being granted rare access to pathways his people typically kept hidden from encroaching settlers. The trust implicit in this gesture wasn't lost on her. "Your people won't object to our presence?" Martha asked nervously. "Those who stay at the winter camp understand healing sometimes requires crossing boundaries," he replied. "You come under my protection, seeking help rather than conquest." As they progressed deeper into the pass, Rebecca's awareness continued to expand in unexpected ways. The rock walls surrounding them seemed to hum with ancient energies, invisible currents that resonated with the tingling flow that had become her constant companion. Without conscious intention, she found herself trailing her fingers along the stone surfaces they passed, each touch revealing impressions that defied conventional explanation. Echoes of those who had traversed this path before, emotions and intentions preserved somehow within the very rock. "The ancestors walked here," she murmured, the knowledge arising unbidden from somewhere beyond rational thought. Nighthawk glanced back at her sharply. "Yes," he confirmed, "for generations beyond counting. How do you know this?" Rebecca struggled to articulate the knowing that flowed through her fingertips. "I feel their presence, not as ghosts, but as memories held in the stone itself." She paused, aware of how bizarre this sounded. "I'm sorry, I know that makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense," Nighthawk countered, "but such awareness typically comes only to those trained in our ways from childhood or to elders who have spent decades in communion with the land." He studied her with renewed intensity. "Your gift unfolds with remarkable speed." Martha watched this exchange with evident discomfort, her worldview challenged by concepts that contradicted everything she'd been taught. "Is it?" She hesitated, searching for words. "Is it safe? What's happening to her?" Nighthawk considered the question seriously. All power requires balance and understanding. Without guidance, such gifts can overwhelm. He looked at Rebecca directly. "This is why training matters." The implications hung in the cold mountain air between them. Rebecca sensed a crossroads, approaching, not a physical one, but a juncture of decision that would shape whatever future remained to her. The Prestons had abandoned her to die, severing her connection to the settler community that had never truly accepted her blindness. Now an unexpected door was opening to a completely different way of understanding the world and her place within it. Near sunset, they emerged from Thunder Pass into a sheltered valley that cradled Nighthawk's winter camp. Unlike the crude trapper's cabin where they'd been abandoned, this settlement reflected generations of hard-won wisdom about surviving. Harsh mountain winters, 7 structures formed a rough semicircle, each built into the sloping hillside for natural insulation. Smoke rose from stone chimneys, carrying the inviting scent of cooking fires. Between the dwellings, covered walkways provided protected passage during storms. "It's so ordered," Martha observed with surprise. "Not at all what I expected." Nighthawk acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Many of your people expect us to live as primitives. We simply live differently, adapting to the land rather than forcing it to adapt to us." Their arrival caused immediate stir within the small community. Children appeared first, watching curiously from doorways, followed by adults whose initial wariness gave way to recognition as Nighthawk raised his hand in greeting. An elderly woman emerged from the central dwelling, her silver hair braided, with intricate beadwork, her bearing regal despite advanced age. Grandmother Moonwater. Nighthawk greeted her respectfully in Cherokee before switching to English for his companion's benefit. "I bring those who require shelter and healing." The elder woman's gaze traveled from Jacob's pale face to Martha's fearful stance, finally settling on Rebecca with penetrating intensity. Though Rebecca couldn't see the scrutiny, she felt it like a physical touch, probing and evaluative. "The child carries illness that passes," Moonwater observed in accented but clear English. "The mother carries fear that can be healed. But this one," her voice shifted as she addressed Rebecca directly, "you carry something else entirely, something awakening." Rebecca inclined her head respectfully. "I don't fully understand what's happening to me," she admitted. Moonwater made a sound of acknowledgement. "Understanding follows experience, not precedes it. Come, the boy needs warmth and medicine." The welcome, while cautious, proved genuine. The small Cherokee community valued Nighthawk's healing, skills enough to accept his judgment regarding the unexpected visitors. Jacob was immediately taken to a healing lodge where Moonwater and another woman began treatments using herbs that filled the space with pungent medicinal aromas. Martha stayed anxiously at her son's side, gradually relaxing as the obvious expertise of the indigenous healers became apparent. Nighthawk led Rebecca to a dwelling near the edge of the settlement. "You will stay here," he explained, guiding her inside. Once used by visiting healers from other bands, Rebecca explored the space with her heightened senses. Though simple, the structure offered comfort far beyond the abandoned trapper's cabin. A raised sleeping platform covered with soft furs, a well-constructed fireplace that drew smoke efficiently, and shelves containing what her sensitive fingers identified as dozens of carefully stored herbs and medicines. "Why separate from Martha and Jacob?" she asked, curious rather than concerned. Nighthawk was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "What awakens in you requires space and attention. The healing lodge is for physical ailments. This dwelling," he paused, "is for those walking between worlds." The phrase resonated through Rebecca's being, naming something she had sensed but couldn't articulate. "You believe I'm meant to be here," she stated, understanding blooming. That being abandoned in the blizzard wasn't merely tragic chance. "I believe paths reveal themselves when we have courage to walk them," Nighthawk replied. 4 days ago, I felt called to check my hunting cabin despite the approaching storm. I had no logical reason to go there. The implication was clear. Something beyond ordinary awareness had drawn him to find them, just as something beyond conventional chance had awakened Rebecca's unusual perceptions. That evening, Rebecca was invited to join a community meal in the central lodge. The atmosphere remained cautious but hospitable as Nighthawk explained their circumstances to the gathered families. Rebecca sensed varying reactions among the Cherokee. Curiosity predominated, along with a measure of concern about harboring white settlers, however temporarily. "Your wagon train abandoned you to die," stated an older man identified as Running Elk, one of the camp's hunters. "Yet you seek shelter among those your people consider enemies." Rebecca considered her response carefully. "I don't view you as enemies," she said finally. "Even before losing my sight, I questioned many attitudes I was raised with. Afterward, I learned how quickly those who claimed to value me could discard me when I became inconvenient." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Perhaps that experience helped me recognize the difference between what I've been taught about your people and the truth I'm experiencing now." Her honesty appeared to satisfy Running Elk, who nodded thoughtfully. "Blindness has given you clearer vision than most who can see." As the meal concluded, Moonwater approached Rebecca, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite her advanced age. "Walk with me," she invited, not a request but a gentle command. Outside, the night air carried the crystal clarity unique to high mountain elevations. Stars blazed overhead in patterns Rebecca couldn't see but somehow sensed, their ancient light creating impressions that registered through her emerging awareness. "Nighthawk believes you have the gift of inner seeing," Moonwater stated, without preamble. "Such gifts are rare among our people and unheard of among whites." Rebecca absorbed this direct approach, appreciating the absence of artifice. "I don't know what to call it," she admitted, "only that since entering these mountains, I've experienced awareness beyond normal senses, knowing which plants heal, sensing pathways through unseen terrain, feeling impressions preserved in stone." Moonwater made a sound of acknowledgement. "These are indeed marks of the gift." The elder woman was silent for several moments, considering. Such awakening typically follows a traditional path. Years of preparation, ceremonial guidance, careful instruction. Yours comes like spring flood rather than gentle stream. Is that dangerous? Rebecca asked, recalling Nighthawk's comments about balance. All power without understanding brings risk, Moonwater confirmed, but refusing the gift once it awakens brings greater danger still. Rebecca contemplated this, sensing the wisdom earned through decades of experience. What would you advise? The elder's hand touched Rebecca's arm lightly, the contact establishing connection between them. Stay through the winter. Learn what Nighthawk and I can teach about controlling and directing your awareness. When spring thaw allows travel, decide your path with clearer understanding. The proposal simultaneously thrilled and terrified Rebecca. Remaining through winter meant fully separating from the settler world that had already rejected her. Yet returning to that world without understanding her emerging abilities seemed equally impossible. "Martha and Jacob?" she asked. "The boy improves already," Moonwater assured her. "By the time Mountain Pass is clear, he will be strong enough to travel. His mother can decide whether to seek the settlement or return eastward." Rebecca nodded, decision forming with surprising clarity. "I accept your guidance with gratitude." The days that followed established new rhythms for the unlikely. Visitors to the Cherokee winter camp. Jacob's recovery progressed rapidly under Moonwater's expert care. The boy's natural resilience aided by medicines unknown to Western physicians. Martha's initial fearfulness gradually yielded to reluctant appreciation as she witnessed the community's functional harmony and the genuine concern shown for her son's well-being. For Rebecca, a different journey unfolded, one focused inward as much as outward. Nighthawk began her instruction the morning after their arrival, emphasizing fundamentals that children in his culture typically learned from earliest awareness. "All things exist in relationship," he explained as they sat in the healing lodge surrounded by carefully preserved plants. Each herb connects to elements that nurtured it: earth, water, sun, air. Each element carries qualities that become part of the plant's medicine. Rebecca absorbed these teachings with growing fascination. The Cherokee approach to healing differed fundamentally from Western medicine's reductive focus. Rather than isolating specific compounds or effects, their traditional knowledge emphasized interconnection and balance, understanding illness as disruption in the body's harmony with natural forces. "Your gift allows you to sense these connections directly," Nighthawk continued, "but sensing without understanding brings confusion. We must build foundation beneath your awareness." The instruction began with the most basic elements, learning to identify dozens of medicinal plants through touch, scent, and the subtle energy each emanated. Rebecca's fingers moved from sample to sample, her enhanced perception registering distinctions no ordinary touch could discern. She learned to recognize which plants cooled fever, which strengthened blood, which eased pain or promoted healing of injuries. "How do your people typically learn this knowledge?" she asked during a brief rest. "Through years of observation and instruction," Nighthawk replied. "A healer's apprentice typically studies 10 or more years before working independently." Rebecca considered this timescale against her own accelerated awakening. "Yet you believe I can learn enough in one winter to manage this ability?" Nighthawk's voice carried careful consideration. "Not mastery. That requires lifetime dedication, but sufficient understanding to prevent the gift from overwhelming you." He paused. "What awakens in you appears to be knowledge that already exists somewhere within, not entirely new learning." This assessment aligned with Rebecca's experience. When working with the plants, she often sensed their properties before Nighthawk explained them, as if remembering something long forgotten rather than encountering completely new information. Moonwater contributed different aspects to Rebecca's education. where Nighthawk focused on practical applications and identifying specific properties, the elder woman emphasized spiritual foundations underlying the healing traditions. All power originates in the great mystery, she explained during evening sessions beside the communal fire. We do not create healing. We align ourselves with forces already flowing through creation. These philosophical dimensions might once have conflicted with Rebecca's Christian upbringing, but her experience of abandonment had already shaken many certainties. The Cherokee elders' teachings offered a framework that explained her emerging perceptions far more effectively than anything in her previous understanding. "You speak of powers flowing through creation," she observed during one such conversation, "yet we were taught there is only one power, God." Moonwater considered this thoughtfully. Perhaps we describe the same truth with different words. A great river has many currents, yet remains one river. This perspective, finding commonality beneath apparent difference, characterized much of the Cherokee approach. Rebecca found herself reconsidering many assumptions as weeks passed in the isolated mountain community. Martha watched these developments with growing concern. "You're becoming one of them," she remarked one afternoon as they sat watching Jacob play with Cherokee children who had gradually accepted the strange boy with pale skin. "I'm learning from them," Rebecca corrected gently, "as are you, whether you acknowledge it or not." Martha couldn't deny this truth. Her son's life had been saved by indigenous medicine after white settlers abandoned him to die. Every day brought new evidence contradicting the prejudices she'd absorbed throughout her life. "What happens when spring comes?" Martha asked. "Will you seek the settlement with us?" Rebecca hesitated, uncertain how to explain the transformation occurring within her. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "The path ahead isn't clear yet." As January yielded to February, Rebecca's unusual abilities continued to develop under careful guidance. Nighthawk introduced more advanced aspects of traditional medicine, how combinations of plants created effects no single herb could achieve, how timing of harvest affected potency, how intention during preparation influenced healing outcomes. "Your hands already know," he observed, as Rebecca correctly combined 3 rare roots for a treatment Moonwater was preparing for an elder suffering joint pain. "They move without hesitation." Rebecca noticed this herself. Her fingers selected and measured appropriate quantities with certainty that bypassed conscious deliberation. This intuitive knowledge extended beyond plant medicine into other aspects of perception. She navigated the winter camp with such confidence that newcomers often failed to realize she was blind until directly informed. More remarkably, she began evidencing awareness that transcended physical proximity. During a particularly harsh snowstorm that confined everyone to their dwellings, Rebecca suddenly sat upright from meditation, announcing, "Hunters returning early, 2 injured, 1 seriously." Nighthawk, who had been instructing her on breath control, looked startled. "How do you know this?" "I see them," she replied, using visual terminology despite her blindness. 3 men struggling through snow near the western approach. One supports another who cannot walk unassisted. The settlement's lookout confirmed her vision 30 minutes later, when 3 hunters indeed returned, one supporting another with a badly broken leg sustained in a fall. Rebecca's accurate perception of events beyond physical sensing range sent ripples of astonishment through the community. That evening, as Nighthawk dressed the injured hunter's leg, he addressed what had occurred. "Your gift expands beyond my experience," he admitted. "Even our most skilled seers rarely perceive events at such distance without specific ritual preparation." Rebecca had no explanation to offer. The vision had arrived unbidden, a sudden clarity that opened like a window into distant events. "It felt natural," she said simply. as if distance means less than we assume. Grandmother Moonwater should guide you now, Nighthawk decided. Her knowledge of the seeing gift exceeds mine. The elder woman accepted this transition without surprise, as if expecting it. The Between Worlds gift manifests differently in each receiver, she explained to Rebecca the following morning. For some, plants speak louder. For others, distant seeing comes more naturally. We must discover your particular path. Moonwater's guidance opened new dimensions to Rebecca's emerging abilities. Unlike Nighthawk's structured approach to medicinal knowledge, the elder woman's teaching style embraced the fluid, intuitive aspects of perception that transcended ordinary boundaries. The gift of seeing without eyes follows no single path, Moonwater explained, as they sat in her dwelling one snowy morning. For some, it flows like water, finding natural channels. For others, it strikes like lightning, revealing momentary clarity before fading. Your gift appears to be fire, consuming barriers between worlds. Rebecca considered this metaphor, finding truth in it. Her awareness had indeed ignited suddenly, burning through limitations with unexpected intensity. Fire can warm or destroy, she observed. How do I ensure mine doesn't consume me? The elder woman nodded approvingly. A wise question. Control comes through understanding your center, the still point within that remains unchanged regardless of what your gift reveals. This concept of an anchoring center became the foundation of Rebecca's training under Moonwater's guidance. Each morning began with exercises in breath control and inner stillness, establishing a core of calm Rebecca could return to when perceptions threatened to overwhelm her. February's bitter cold kept the camp's residents primarily indoors, creating an environment of concentrated learning. Rebecca divided her days between practical assistance in the healing lodge, where her sensitivity to plant energies proved increasingly valuable, and specialized instruction with Moonwater on managing her expanding awareness. Martha and Jacob, meanwhile, found their own places within the community's winter routine. The boy's recovery progressed remarkably, his natural resilience complemented by the Cherokee healer's effective treatments. Soon he was joining other children in simple chores and games, picking up Cherokee words and phrases with the effortless acquisition unique to childhood. His mother's integration proved more complicated. Martha's ingrained prejudices didn't disappear overnight, but necessity forced adaptation. She began assisting with food preparation and weaving, skills that transcended cultural boundaries. The women of the camp accepted her contributions without demanding she abandon her own identity, a generosity that gradually eroded Martha's defensive barriers. I never imagined living among Indians, she confided to Rebecca one evening as they shared a meal. My husband would scarcely believe it. Would he also believe that the people he feared saved his son's life? Rebecca asked gently. Martha had no ready answer, her worldview still recalibrating around experiences that contradicted everything she'd been taught. The Henderson wagon train must have reached the settlement by now, she said instead, changing the subject. Do you think they told anyone about us? The question hung between them, carrying implications neither woman could fully assess. If the Prestons and others reported their deaths during the blizzard, no search parties would be organized come spring. They would be mourned briefly, then forgotten, their possessions divided, their identities erased from the narrative of westward expansion. I suspect they reported exactly what absolved them of responsibility, Rebecca replied after careful consideration. Whether that means declaring us dead or claiming we chose to remain behind. Martha nodded, accepting this harsh assessment. So we truly are on our own. We are with those who chose not to abandon us, Rebecca corrected, the distinction important to her. That seems the more significant reality. As February yielded to March, subtle changes in the mountain atmosphere signaled spring's distant approach. Though snow still blanketed the valley, the quality of light shifted, days lengthened, and birds absent during deep winter began returning to higher elevations. Rebecca's abilities continued evolving in unexpected directions. The distant seeing that had allowed her to perceive the injured hunters developed into something more sophisticated, an awareness that extended beyond present events to glimpse shadowy impressions of what might come. "There will be visitors," she announced during an evening meal gathering. "Not now, when the snow retreats from Thunder Pass. Men seeking something." The certainty in her voice prompted immediate attention from the Cherokee elders. Running Elk, the senior hunter who had questioned her months earlier, leaned forward with concern, etching his weathered features. "Soldiers? Settlers?" Rebecca concentrated, focusing on the impression that had arrived unbidden during the meal. "Men with maps and instruments. They seek passages through the mountains." Nighthawk and Moonwater exchanged significant glances. "Railroad surveyors," Nighthawk interpreted. "They have been pushing westward each season, marking routes for the Iron Road." The implications weren't lost on anyone present. Railroad construction brought dramatic changes wherever it penetrated. Settlements expanded, hunting grounds disappeared, traditional territories became increasingly vulnerable to encroachment. "If they find our valley." Running Elk left, the thought unfinished, the threat self-evident. Moonwater studied Rebecca with heightened interest. "This seeing of things not yet occurred. When did it begin?" "Recently," Rebecca admitted. "At first I thought they were merely strange dreams or imaginings, but they carry a different quality, a certainty, unlike ordinary thoughts." The elder nodded. "The highest form of the gift. Most seers require ceremony and preparation to glimpse the approaching path. For you, it comes unbidden." This development added new urgency to Rebecca's training. If her perceptions were indeed revealing future events, understanding how to interpret and potentially influence them became crucial not just for her own well-being, but potentially for the Cherokee community that had sheltered her. "Your gift grows faster than your understanding," Moonwater observed during their next session. "We must teach you to filter these visions, to distinguish between what must be and what might be." This distinction became central to Rebecca's instruction. She learned that perceptions of future events rarely appeared as fixed certainties. Instead, they manifested as branching possibilities, threads of potential that strengthened or faded depending on present choices. "The approaching path has many forks," Moonwater explained, using a stick to draw intersecting lines in the earth floor of her dwelling. "What you perceive is often the strongest possibility at that moment, not an unchangeable destiny." This concept both relieved and burdened Rebecca. If future glimpses weren't immutable fate, then choices in the present moment carried tremendous significance. The responsibility weighed heavily as she contemplated the surveyors whose arrival she had foreseen. "Can we prevent them from finding the valley?" she asked Nighthawk as they gathered medicinal bark from a sheltered grove where early spring thaw had exposed the lower tree trunks. He considered this thoughtfully. "Perhaps delay, but not prevent indefinitely. The Iron Road represents too many powerful interests. Where surveyors go this year, construction will follow within 5. Then your people will need to relocate." "Again," Rebecca said softly, understanding the painful history behind his matter-of-fact assessment. Nighthawk's expression remained composed, though Rebecca's heightened perception detected the sorrow beneath his calm exterior. "We adapt, we survive. It has been our way since before your people arrived on these shores." The quiet dignity in his response moved Rebecca deeply. Throughout her months among the Cherokee, she had observed a resilience that transcended mere endurance, a capacity to preserve essential values and knowledge despite repeated displacements and threats. "What will you do when spring fully arrives?" Nighthawk asked, changing the subject. Martha speaks increasingly of finding the settlement where the wagon train intended to establish itself. The question touched on decisions Rebecca had been contemplating with increasing frequency. The winter's isolation was ending. Soon, choices would need to be made about next steps, whether to rejoin settler society or pursue a different path. "I don't belong in their world anymore," she said, with quiet certainty. "Even before this gift awakened, I existed on the margins, tolerated rather than valued, defined by what I lacked rather than what I offered." Nighthawk nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "And now I perceive more without eyes than most do with perfect vision," Rebecca replied, "but that doesn't mean I've found where I belong." Her uncertain future remained a persistent undercurrent as March progressed into April. The snow retreated gradually from the valley floor, exposing tender new growth beneath. The community's activities shifted accordingly. Hunting parties ventured farther afield. Women began preparing planting areas for summer crops. Children spent more time outdoors engaged in play that doubled as practical skills training. As physical conditions improved, the Cherokee leaders began discussing seasonal migration plans. The winter camp, while perfectly situated for cold weather survival, would be abandoned once full spring arrived in favor of summer hunting territories. Further north, "You and Martha must decide soon," Moonwater advised Rebecca during one of their regular sessions. "The mountain passes will open within weeks. If you seek the settler community, guides can take you before we journey northward." The approaching decision point created tension between Martha and Rebecca. Though both women had integrated into the Cherokee community to varying degrees during their unexpected winter residence, their perspectives on future plans diverged significantly. "We've been given a second chance at the life we set out to build," Martha argued during a private conversation. "The settlement will need women with our skills. Jacob deserves to grow up among his own kind, with proper schooling." Rebecca understood these concerns, particularly regarding the boy's future opportunities. Yet she questioned the underlying assumptions about where they truly belonged. "These people saved our lives when our own kind left us to die," she pointed. "How gently. Perhaps that tells us something important about kinship beyond blood and background." Martha had no immediate counter to this truth, but her expression revealed persistent certainty that their long-term future lay within settler society, not among indigenous people, regardless of how generously they had been treated. The anticipated surveyors arrived in late April, just as Rebecca had foreseen. A party of 5 men with technical instruments and detailed maps entered the valley from the western approach. Unaware of the Cherokee camp concealed in a sheltered bowl on the eastern slope, scouts tracked their movements while remaining undetected, reporting back on the surveyors' methodical documentation of potential railroad routes. "They marked the central passage," Running Elk informed the gathered council, "measuring grades and turns. They do not seek our camp specifically, but their intended route passes within viewing distance." This intelligence prompted immediate preparations for accelerated departure, though the community had planned to remain another 3 weeks. Before seasonal migration, the risk of discovery now outweighed the benefits of extended residence. "We leave in 3 days," Moonwater announced. "Those seeking the settler community must decide now." The ultimatum forced the issue Martha had been reluctant to resolve definitely. With Jacob fully recovered and clearly thriving among his Cherokee playmates, her certainty about rejoining settler society had wavered. Yet fundamental beliefs about her son's future remained unchanged. "We must go to the settlement," she finally decided. "Jacob needs education, opportunities our people can provide." Rebecca nodded, acknowledging Martha's choice without judgment. "I understand your decision." "And you?" Martha asked, studying Rebecca's face. "Surely you don't intend to remain with—" She hesitated, then finished, "with them." The hesitation spoke volumes about the distance still remaining despite months of shared experience. For Martha, the Cherokee remained fundamentally other, despite their kindness and acceptance. "My path leads elsewhere," Rebecca replied carefully, "neither to the settlement nor continuing with the Cherokee." This unexpected response startled Martha. "Where then? You can't survive alone, especially without sight." Rebecca smiled slightly at the assumption underlying Martha's concern, the same limitation-focused perspective that had defined others' treatment of her blindness. "I've learned that inability to see doesn't equal inability to perceive. My gifts offer different possibilities now." Though Martha clearly found this response unsatisfying, she recognized the quiet determination that had become increasingly characteristic of Rebecca's demeanor. The once dependent blind woman had transformed during their months in the Cherokee camp, developing confidence and clarity that brooked no patronizing concern. That evening, Rebecca sought out Nighthawk beside the community fire. The medicine man had become not just teacher, but trusted friend during their shared journey, the person who most fully comprehended the transformation she had undergone. "I've made my decision," she informed him, settling beside him on a log, smoothed by generations of use. "I won't accompany Martha to the settlement, nor continue with your people on the summer migration." Nighthawk absorbed this without visible surprise. "You have seen another path." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded confirmation. "There's a place to the north, a valley between three peaks where streams converge. I've seen it repeatedly, in my awareness, calling me with increasing clarity. Thunder Valleys," Nighthawk identified immediately. "Sacred ground to many tribes. Few venture there outside of specific ceremonial purposes." "Something awaits me there," Rebecca continued. "I don't fully understand what or why, but the certainty grows stronger each day." Nighthawk considered this thoughtfully, stoking the fire with a slender branch. Sparks spiraled upward into the darkening sky, momentarily mimicking the stars appearing overhead. "Such clear calling is rare," he finally said. "When it comes, wisdom lies in heeding it." He paused, then added, "But Thunder Valleys can be dangerous for those unprepared. Powerful energies concentrate there, the same forces that likely accelerated your gift's awakening." Rebecca had sensed this herself, that the place calling her carried potent qualities beyond ordinary experience. "Will you guide me there?" she asked directly. "Not to remain, but to ensure I find the correct location." The request hung between them, weighted with significance beyond simple geographic guidance. Nighthawk had already delayed his traditional responsibilities to teach her throughout winter. Asking for further commitment represented no small matter. "I will take you," he agreed after consideration. "My people understand that sometimes larger duties supersede routine obligations." 3 days later, as the Cherokee community completed preparations for departure, Rebecca faced farewells that carried unexpected emotional weight. Despite her relatively brief residence among them, many camp members had moved beyond initial wariness to genuine connection. Moonwater embraced her with surprising strength for one of such advanced age. "Remember the center within," she counseled. "No matter what Thunder Valleys reveals, return always to that still point." Jacob clung to Rebecca tearfully, his childhood resilience temporarily overwhelmed by another significant change. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked, the question piercing in its simple directness. Rebecca knelt to his level, taking his small hands in hers. "The future holds many possibilities," she replied, drawing on her emerging understanding of time's fluid nature. "Our paths may well cross again, though perhaps not as we might expect." Martha's farewell proved more complex, layered with unresolved tensions and genuine concern. "I still think you're making a terrible mistake," she began, then softened. "But I owe you my son's life. Without your insights about the herbs that first night, he wouldn't have survived until Nighthawk found us." "We saved each other," Rebecca corrected gently, "and found unexpected strengths in the process." 2 Cherokee guides would accompany Martha and Jacob to the nearest settlement, ensuring their safe arrival before rejoining the main group. Nighthawk would lead Rebecca northward to Thunder Valleys before catching up with his people at their summer grounds. As the community dispersed in different directions that clear spring morning, Rebecca experienced a momentary wave of doubt. Was she following genuine insight or merely fleeing the complications of returning to settler society? The uncertainty passed quickly as she centered herself using Moonwater's techniques, reconnecting with the clear inner knowing that had guided her decision. "Ready?" Nighthawk asked, standing beside her with minimal supplies packed for their journey. Rebecca nodded, facing north where her perception detected distant mountains rising against the sky she couldn't see with physical eyes. "Ready?" Their path led through increasingly remote wilderness as they traveled north over the next 4 days. Nighthawk maintained a steady pace, recognizing Rebecca's significantly improved endurance after months in the mountain environment. Her ability to navigate challenging terrain without sight had developed to remarkable levels, often identifying obstacles before Nighthawk mentioned them. "Your perception extends beyond ordinary boundaries," he observed as they crossed a particularly difficult rocky slope. "You move as if you see with more than eyes." Rebecca had gradually accepted this truth about her transformed awareness. Though technically blind, she experienced the world through layered impressions that combined physical senses with something else entirely. Energetic patterns, intention fields, memory traces embedded in the landscape itself. "I perceive differently," she acknowledged, "neither better nor worse than sight, simply different." On their journey's 5th day, the terrain changed dramatically. They ascended through a narrow pass that opened suddenly into a sheltered basin surrounded by 3 distinctive peaks. Multiple streams converged at the valley's center, creating a natural nexus of flowing water that carved intricate patterns across the landscape. "Thunder Valleys," Nighthawk announced as they paused at the basin's entrance. "We have arrived." Rebecca stood motionless, absorbing the location through her unique perception. The tingling awareness that had become her constant companion intensified dramatically, flowing through her body with almost electric intensity. The entire valley seemed to vibrate with concentrated energy that resonated with something deep within her being. "It's alive," she whispered, inadequate words for the experience flooding her consciousness. "The whole valley, pulsing with awareness." Nighthawk nodded. Many traditions speak of places where the boundary between worlds grows thin. This is such a location, a convergence point for forces usually separate. They made camp near one of the tributary streams, gathering firewood before evening temperatures dropped. As darkness fell, Rebecca's perception of the valley intensified rather than diminished. In her awareness, patterns of light and energy flowed across the landscape, connecting streams, stones, trees, and sky in complex, meaningful relationships. "What do you see?" Nighthawk asked, noticing her unusual stillness as she faced the valley center. "Connections," she replied simply. "Everything here exists in relationship, more visibly than elsewhere. It's as if—" she searched for appropriate words, "as if the valley reveals what remains hidden in other places." Nighthawk accepted this description without question. Different visitors perceive different aspects of what exists here. The valley often shows what the seeker most needs to understand. As they shared a simple meal beside their small fire, Rebecca contemplated the journey that had brought her to this remote location. From dependent blind woman, deemed expendable by her own community, to someone capable of perceiving dimensions beyond ordinary awareness. The transformation seemed simultaneously miraculous and inevitable, as if she had been moving toward this awakening long before conscious recognition. "Tomorrow I continue alone," she said as they finished eating. Not a question, but a statement of clear intention. Nighthawk studied her thoughtfully across the flickering firelight. "Yes," he agreed, "some journeys must be walked without companion or guide." His acceptance confirmed what Rebecca already knew, that the final steps into her emerging identity required solitary exploration of what Thunder Valleys offered. Nighthawk had fulfilled his promise, bringing her safely to the location that had called through her visions. What followed would be uniquely hers to discover. "When we parted from the Cherokee camp, many believed you were making a grave mistake," Nighthawk said after a comfortable silence, "choosing isolation over community, uncertainty over security." Rebecca smiled slightly. "As Martha believed I chose unwisely by not accompanying her to the settlement." "Both perspectives assume vulnerability requires protection," Nighthawk observed. "Neither recognizes that authentic strength sometimes emerges precisely when conventional protection is removed." This insight resonated deeply with Rebecca's experience. Had the Prestons not abandoned her during the blizzard? Had comfortable security not been stripped away completely, would her extraordinary abilities ever have awakened? The question offered no certain answer, yet she sensed that adversity had indeed served as catalyst for transformation. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked, not seeking prediction, but Nighthawk's wisdom regarding the valley's nature. He considered carefully before responding. "Thunder Valleys offers different experiences to different seekers. Some receive visions, some hear the voices of ancestors, some find healing for ancient wounds." He paused, adding, "The valley reveals what exists within the seeker, often aspects unknown even to themselves." Dawn broke over Thunder Valleys in waves of amber and gold that Rebecca sensed rather than saw. The morning air carried a crystalline quality, each breath filling her, lungs with vitality that seemed to flow directly from the landscape itself. She stood at the edge of their small camp, facing the valley's center, where multiple streams converged in a natural basin ringed by ancient stones. "I'll depart once you're settled," Nighthawk said, approaching with quiet footsteps. "My people will expect me at the summer grounds within a week." Rebecca nodded, grateful for his understanding that her journey now required solitude. "You've done more than guide me here," she said, turning toward him. "You recognized what was awakening within me when others saw only limitation." Nighthawk's hand briefly touched her shoulder, the gesture conveying respect between equals, rather than assistance to someone deemed helpless. "Recognition is the beginning of wisdom," he replied simply. "What grows from that seed depends on the ground in which it's planted." After sharing a light breakfast of dried berries and journey bread, Rebecca gathered her minimal belongings. Nighthawk had ensured she carried essentials for extended solitary stay: a small cooking pot, flint for fire starting, a hunting knife, water container, and sufficient dried provisions until she could establish sustainable practices. "The valley provides for those who approach with proper intention," he advised as final preparation. "Listen before taking, ask before using, give thanks for what's received." These principles reflected Cherokee relationship with the natural world. Not dominion or exploitation, but reciprocal exchange based on respect and recognition of interdependence. Rebecca had absorbed these values during her months among the mountain community, finding them aligned with her emerging perceptions of interconnection. How will I know if what I experience here is truth or merely imagination? She asked, voicing the question that had lingered since deciding to seek Thunder Valleys. Nighthawk considered thoughtfully before answering. Truth resonates beyond the moment, he finally said. Like a stone dropped in still water, it creates ripples that continue outward, touching shores beyond immediate perception. With these words and a simple blessing in Cherokee, Nighthawk departed, leaving Rebecca truly alone for the first time since the blizzard that had nearly claimed her life. Standing at the valley's edge, she absorbed the profound silence. Not emptiness, but a living quiet filled with subtle sounds her heightened senses detected. Water flowing over stone, birds calling from distant trees, wind moving through mountain grasses. "I am here," she said aloud, the simple declaration somehow important as introduction to the valley itself. "I have come seeking understanding." With these words spoken, Rebecca began methodically exploring her surroundings, building a mental map through her unique form of perception. The valley floor extended approximately 2 miles in diameter, cradled between 3 distinctive mountain peaks that created a natural boundary. Multiple streams descended from these heights, converging at the central basin where a collection of standing stones formed a rough circle around the deepest pool. This stone circle called to her with particular intensity, the tingling awareness that had become her constant companion, intensifying dramatically as she approached it. Rebecca moved cautiously, respecting the evident significance of this central feature. Her fingers traced the rough surface of the nearest standing stone, detecting carved symbols weathered by centuries of exposure. "Ancient," she murmured, recognizing that human hands had shaped and positioned these stones long before European settlement. The realization deepened her sense of entering a space where countless others had sought wisdom or healing across generations. Rebecca established her camp near this central circle, but maintained respectful distance, selecting a small, protected alcove where one of the tributary streams created a natural boundary. Here she unpacked her minimal supplies and constructed a simple shelter using fallen branches and the techniques she'd learned from the Cherokee over winter. That first day, she focused entirely on practical matters, ensuring water access, gathering additional firewood, identifying edible plants near her camp that supplemented her provisions. Nighthawk had taught her to recognize dozens of useful species by touch and scent, knowledge that now served her well despite physical blindness. As twilight approached, Rebecca built a small fire and prepared a simple meal, listening to the valley's sounds transform with the transition from day to night. New birds called, different insects emerged, and the water's music seemed to deepen as darkness fell. Though alone, she felt no fear. Her perception had developed to such degree that she navigated this unfamiliar environment with confidence unimaginable to the woman she had been before the blizzard. That night, as she settled beside her banked fire wrapped in a trade blanket that had been Moonwater's parting gift, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this remote valley. From dependent blind woman deemed expendable by her own community to someone capable of independent survival in wilderness, the transformation seemed both miraculous and inevitable, as if she had always been moving toward this awakening. Sleep came easily despite her solitude, the valley's energy creating a cocoon of safety around her small camp. Her dreams flowed like the converging streams, carrying fragments of memory, glimpses of possible futures, and imagery that transcended ordinary experience, neither fully symbolic nor literal, but something between that spoke directly to her deepening awareness. She woke before dawn with absolute certainty about her next steps. The stone circle called with undeniable intensity, offering something she needed to experience directly rather than merely observe from distance. As first light touched the eastern peak, Rebecca approached the ancient arrangement with reverent Deliberation, each step mindful and centered as Moonwater had taught her. The circle comprised 12 standing stones of varying heights, each positioned with evident intention relating to celestial alignments and the valley's natural features. At the precise center stood a flat altar stone bearing deeply carved spirals that Rebecca's sensitive fingers traced with wonder. "Show me," she whispered, not entirely certain who or what she addressed. "I am here to learn." Without conscious decision, Rebecca seated herself cross-legged on the ground beside the central stone, her back straight, hands resting palms upward on her knees, in the meditation posture Moonwater had demonstrated months earlier. She focused on her breath, establishing the rhythmic pattern that created inner stillness amid external sensation. What followed transcended ordinary description. The valley's energy seemed to flow through her, bypassing conventional sensory channels to communicate directly with her consciousness. Rebecca experienced cascading awareness that unfolded in layer upon layer of understanding, not as visual imagery or verbal instruction, but as direct knowing that blossomed within her being. She perceived the valley's history stretching back through countless generations, indigenous peoples of various tribes coming to this sacred convergence point for ceremonies, healing, and communion with forces beyond ordinary perception. She experienced the natural cycles that had shaped the landscape over millennia, glaciers retreating, forests advancing and receding, streams carving their patient paths through stone. Most significantly, she understood with sudden clarity that her blindness had never been limitation but preparation, the physical darkness creating space for different light to emerge. The illness that claimed her sight years earlier had initiated a transformation, now culminating in this sacred valley, opening perceptual doorways that typically remained closed to human awareness. Hours passed unnoticed as Rebecca remained in this state of expanded consciousness. When she finally stirred, the sun had traversed most of its daily arc, afternoon light warming the stone circle. Her physical body ached from prolonged stillness, yet she felt profoundly renewed at deeper levels. "Thank you," she murmured, placing her palm against the central stone in gesture of gratitude for what had been revealed. Over the following days, Rebecca established a rhythm of communion with the valley that balanced practical survival with deepening exploration of her extraordinary abilities. Each morning began with meditation at the stone circle, followed by gathering food, tending her small camp, and carefully documenting her experiences through memorized observations she would later record when materials became available. The valley provided abundantly once she attained appropriate relationship with its resources. Edible plants grew in surprising profusion despite the elevation. Small game presented itself when respectfully approached. One remarkable afternoon, a deer stood calmly beside her camp, allowing Rebecca to touch its flank before departing. An encounter that conveyed blessing beyond words. Her perceptual abilities continued expanding in ways that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Rebecca discovered she could extend her awareness to track weather systems approaching from great distances, sensing atmospheric changes long before physical manifestation. She developed capacity to locate specific medicinal plants across wide areas by attaining their unique energetic signatures, regardless of visual cues an ordinary gatherer might require. Most remarkably, her ability to perceive events distant in time and space strengthened dramatically. Sitting within the stone circle, Rebecca could direct her awareness towards specific locations or individuals, receiving impressions of their current circumstances with startling accuracy. She followed Martha and Jacob's journey to the settlement, witnessing their initial reception and gradual integration into frontier community life. She also perceived Nighthawk's safe arrival at his people's summer grounds, sensing both his reunion with the Cherokee community and the persistent thoughts he directed toward her well-being. This connection across physical separation fascinated Rebecca, suggesting relationships continued beyond conventional boundaries when awareness expanded appropriately. As weeks passed, visitors occasionally approached Thunder Valleys, most frequently indigenous people coming for traditional purposes. Rebecca always sensed their approach long before physical arrival, giving her choice about whether to reveal her presence or maintain solitude. Most often, she observed respectfully from distance, recognizing that others deserved privacy for their own communion with the sacred space. One particularly significant evening near summer solstice, Rebecca sensed multiple people approaching from the eastern ridge, a small group traveling with ceremonial intention rather than practical purpose. Her expanded awareness recognized moonwater among them, the elder's distinctive energy signature unmistakable despite physical distance. Rather than withdrawing as she typically did when others entered the valley, Rebecca prepared her camp for visitors, building her fire higher and arranging seating logs in welcome configuration. By sunset, 5 Cherokee, including Moonwater and Nighthawk, entered the valley, their expressions revealing no surprise at finding her established in evident harmony with the sacred space. "We come for solstice ceremony," Moonwater explained. After warm greetings were exchanged, the vision quest of one young seeker directed us here rather than our traditional grounds. The young man in question, perhaps 17 years old, studied Rebecca with unconcealed wonder. "You are the blind woman who sees," he stated with directness characteristic of youth. "Stories of your gifts have traveled among many bands." Rebecca hadn't considered how her unusual abilities might be perceived by others, focused entirely on understanding rather than reputation. The realization that her journey had become part of wider narrative brought simultaneous discomfort and recognition of responsibility accompanying such attention. "I perceive differently," she acknowledged simply, "neither better nor worse than others, merely along different pathways." That night, Rebecca participated in her first formal Cherokee ceremony, invited by Moonwater to join their solstice observance within the stone circle. The ritual unfolded with timeless elegance, drums establishing heartbeat rhythm, sacred herbs releasing fragrant smoke that carried prayers skyward, songs in ancient language connecting participants to ancestors across generations. During the ceremony's central portion, Rebecca experienced her most profound vision yet, not isolated personal insight, but shared awareness that flowed among all participants. She perceived their collective consciousness as luminous network transcending individual boundaries, each person contributing unique qualities to interwoven whole. Within this shared field of awareness, Rebecca received clear understanding of her purpose moving forward. The gifts awakened through her blindness and developed through Cherokee teachings weren't meant for personal benefit alone, but for bridging divided worlds, increasingly in conflict, across the expanding frontier. As dawn approached and the ceremony concluded, Moonwater took Rebecca's hands in her weathered ones. "You have found your medicine," the elder observed with evident satisfaction. "The valley has completed what began in blizzard darkness." Rebecca nodded, the clarity of her path now unmistakable. "There are others like me," she said, voicing the understanding that had crystallized during their shared vision. "People whose differences are perceived as weakness rather than potential gift." "Many such people suffer needlessly," Nighthawk agreed, joining their conversation. "Rejected by communities that cannot recognize different forms of strength." The Cherokee visitors remained 3 days, sharing stories and meals around Rebecca's campfire before continuing their seasonal journey. During this brief reunion, they helped enhance her simple shelter for long-term habitation, constructing more permanent walls and a smoke-venting roof that would withstand mountain weather through changing seasons. "You intend to stay?" Nighthawk observed, as they worked together, not questioning but confirming what he already perceived. For now, Rebecca replied, this valley offers perfect location for what must come next. What came next unfolded gradually, yet with inevitable progression, like seeds sprouting after dormancy. Word spread through both indigenous networks and frontier communities about the blind woman of Thunder Valleys, who possessed extraordinary healing gifts and perceptions beyond ordinary understanding. The first seekers arrived tentatively, a Blackfoot mother carrying a child with mysterious wasting illness that tribal healers couldn't resolve, a settler whose injuries from mining accident had never properly healed despite conventional medical treatment, a mixed-blood youth caught between cultures, suffering debilitating visions he couldn't interpret or control. Rebecca received each visitor with the same compassionate attention, drawing upon her unique perceptual abilities to identify root causes behind presenting symptoms. Her approach integrated Cherokee medicinal knowledge with her expanded awareness, addressing physical manifestations while recognizing their connection to emotional, spiritual, and energetic dimensions typically ignored by frontier doctors. By autumn equinox, a small but steady stream of diverse seekers found their way to her valley sanctuary. Rebecca established simple protocols that honored the sacred space while serving practical needs, designated healing times, appropriate offerings of gratitude rather than payment, commitment to carry learning back to respective communities rather than developing dependency on her abilities. Nighthawk visited periodically, sometimes bringing supplies difficult to obtain in the remote location. Other times, accompanying particularly challenging cases requiring additional expertise. Their working relationship evolved into balanced partnership between equals with complementary gifts, his generations of traditional knowledge enhancing her extraordinary perception, creating healing approach, unlike anything previously available in the frontier territories. The most significant transformation occurred in mid-October, when Martha unexpectedly appeared at the valley's edge, leading Jacob by the hand and carrying minimal traveling supplies. Rebecca sensed their approach long before physical arrival, preparing appropriate welcome while wondering what circumstances prompted their journey from the settlement. "The stories reached us," Martha explained that evening as they shared food beside Rebecca's fire. "People returning from your valley spoke of remarkable healing and a blind woman who sees truths others miss." She smiled with hint of irony. "I recognized who they described immediately." Jacob, now fully recovered from the illness that nearly claimed his life during the blizzard, studied Rebecca with undisguised fascination. "Mother says you help people like Nighthawk helped me," he said, "that you can feel what makes them sick." Rebecca nodded, responding directly to the child rather than simplifying her explanation. "I perceive patterns others might miss," she confirmed, "connections between body, mind, spirit, and community that affect well-being." Martha's expression revealed both wonder and lingering uncertainty as she observed the confident, capable woman Rebecca had become, so different from the dependent, blind companion she had known during their wagon train journey. "The settlement isn't what we imagined," Martha admitted after Jacob fell asleep. "The promised community became mining camp when gold was discovered nearby. Men outnumber women 10-1. Violence and desperation outweigh cooperation." She sighed deeply. "Not the place I want Jacob to grow up." Rebecca listened without judgment, sensing deeper aspects beneath Martha's surface explanation. "And?" she prompted gently. Martha smiled ruefully, recognizing she couldn't conceal motivations from Rebecca's heightened perception. "And I keep thinking about how different things might have been if the Henderson party hadn't abandoned us," she acknowledged. "How the people who supposedly shared our values left us to die, while those we'd been taught to fear showed true humanity." This fundamental reconsideration of assumptions represented significant evolution in Martha's worldview. Rebecca respected the courage such reassessment required, especially for someone raised with rigid certainties about cultural superiority. "What do you seek now?" she asked. "Purpose," Martha replied without hesitation. "Meaningful contribution. Jacob deserves to grow in community that values more than gold extraction and quick profit." She hesitated before adding, "And I thought perhaps I might assist your work somehow. I have practical skills that could complement your healing abilities." The request revealed remarkable transformation in their relationship, from Martha's initial dismissal of Rebecca as helpless burden to recognition of her significant gifts and desire to support her purpose. Life had humbled both women, though through drastically different pathways. "Many who come here need practical support beyond what I alone can provide," Rebecca acknowledged thoughtfully. "Shelter, nourishment, basic care while healing occurs." Indeed, this conversation marked the beginning of Thunder Valley's evolution from solitary retreat to small but intentional healing community. Martha's organizational abilities and practical homemaking skills complemented Rebecca's perceptual gifts and Nighthawk's medicinal knowledge. Together, they created functional infrastructure to support increasing numbers seeking help from diverse backgrounds. By early winter, 3 small cabins stood near Rebecca's original shelter, providing accommodations for those requiring extended healing or instruction. A central lodge offered communal gathering space, where visitors might share meals and stories, regardless of tribal affiliation or cultural origin. Gardens established during summer months supplied food reserves supplemented by hunting and gathered provisions. Most remarkably, the community transcended conventional frontier divisions between indigenous and settler populations. Cherokee families occasionally wintered in the valley when traditional territories proved unsafe due to encroaching settlement. Settlers seeking healing sometimes remained afterwards, contributing skills while learning alternative perspectives on relationship with land and resources. As snow returned to the high country, Rebecca often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had transformed potential tragedy into unexpected blessing. Standing at the valley's edge, one crystalline December morning, with snow crunching beneath her feet, she perceived the perfect symmetry of her path, how abandonment had led to discovery, limitation to expanded awareness, rejection to newfound purpose. "Gratitude for all that has been, openness to all that comes," she murmured, echoing Moonwater's teaching about balanced perspective when facing life's continuous unfolding. Nighthawk approached quietly, having arrived the previous evening with medicinal supplies for winter months. "You're remembering," he observed perceptively. Rebecca smiled. "The blizzard that nearly killed me ultimately gave me life beyond anything I could have imagined." "What others intended as ending became beginning," Nighthawk agreed. Together, they surveyed the small community that had emerged from that desperate night when Martha's family and the Henderson party abandoned those deemed expendable. What might have been tragedy had transformed through courage, compassion, and recognition of gifts hidden beneath apparent limitation. "The valley was waiting," Rebecca said softly. "And so was I, though neither of us knew it then." Nighthawk nodded, understanding the deeper truth in her observation. Some journeys begin only when conventional paths are blocked. Some gifts awaken only when comfortable darkness gives way to challenging light. As they turned back toward the lodge where morning activities were beginning, Rebecca sensed with absolute clarity that her journey remained unfinished. The community taking shape in Thunder Valleys represented not culmination, but foundation, the beginning of bridge building. Work desperately needed as 2 civilizations continued their painful collision across expanding frontiers. "They left a blind woman to die during a blizzard," she reflected, never imagining that death would be rebirth into greater vision. Her words carried no bitterness, only wonder at how limitation transformed to strength when perceived through different awareness. Her blindness, once defined solely as loss, had become doorway to perception beyond ordinary seeing, a gift that now served many beyond herself. That evening, as community members gathered in the central lodge, sharing stories and meals, Rebecca perceived the luminous connections flowing between each person, invisible threads of relationship transcending cultural boundaries, language, differences, and conventional divisions. This capacity to recognize underlying unity beneath apparent separation represented the most profound medicine emergent from her transformed awareness. The blind woman abandoned to die had found not merely survival, but profound purpose, becoming vision-bearer for a different future than either world could imagine alone. In Thunder Valleys, that future took tentative first form, a seed of possibility planted in fertile ground, where healing transcended cultural boundaries and perceived limitations revealed unexpected gifts. As winter settled fully around their mountain sanctuary, Rebecca welcomed each new day with the same quiet affirmation, "I see clearly now." The paradox of this statement, coming from a physically blind woman, contained perfect truth that illuminated not just her individual journey, but the potential transformation awaiting anyone courageous enough to perceive beyond conventional sight, into the deeper connections that united all life in shared purpose and possibility. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.